CoW as a tool that transposes CSV files to RDF using a recipe. To install CoW, we use pip. Oh, now it works. Pip install CoW CSVW. CSVW, it stands for CSV on the web. As you can see, I already installed the tool. Maybe you also install tool and you want to make sure you have the latest version of CoW. You can add upgrade, and then it really installs the latest version. Okay, so now that we have the tool, let's see how we can take a CSV file and build RDF. To do so, we use the command CoW tool, build, and then the name of the CSV file. What it then actually does is detect the encoding of the CSV file and the headers or the columns inside the CSV file. And based on that, it builds a recipe. So if we now look in the directory, we can see we have an additional file, which is the recipe. Based on this recipe, we can build RDF. To do that, we again say CoW tool, but now we convert the CSV file. Okay. Now it's done, and if we now look, we actually see that we have an nquad file which contains the triples. So we can look at that nquad file, and here we see our triples. So for example, we have row 0, which is of type, which is the property male, which is of type 0. So if we look here, row 0, that would be this first row, male 0. Let's see whether we can find one with a surname. That's over here. So we can see that the row with ID 1, so that is this one, has surname careful. And you can see that's indeed, so it's in the column careful. So regarding the numbers of the IDs, the header is not used, so this would be actually the first row, and because this is Python code, it's called row 0, and this would be row 1. Now, as you can see, this linked data is not really helpful too much, because example.com doesn't say too much. This property surname is something that's generated automatically, where there's much better existing properties that we can use. So let's see what we can do to enhance our recipe. To do so, we look at this metadata JSON file, which is the recipe. Okay, so this is our recipe, which starts with a basic definition of the CoW tool. So if you wanted to build your own version, you could change this line. And here we see the definition of our base URL, this example.com. So that wasn't really helpful, so let's choose our own domain instead. So let's call it Smurf Squad. So smurfsquad.com. Next, we see a list of prefixes, and you probably recognize them. Some of them, these are mostly prefixes used in humanities. If you wanted to use a prefix of your own, you could simply add one. So let's do that here. So I could say Smurf Squad is the http as smurfsquad.com/id prefix. Okay. So if we wanted to use a Smurf Squad prefix, we could simply type SSQ, and then it gets it like that. Now we also saw that the identifiers were based on the row, and that's here defined in the table schema. So this part, table schema, provides you the information on the columns. I'll push this a little bit to the side so you can see there's a column person ID, surname, male, and occupation. Now rather than using the row number, it seems to make much more sense to use the person ID as an identifier. So let's do that. We'll take this out and then we add the name of our identifier. Okay. There's actually not much I want to say about the person ID vocabulary, so I can simply delete that. But I do want to say something about the relationship between my person identifier and the surname. So here we can see that it's defined as a string, which CoW does by default. But it had this strange prefix surname. So let's change that into, I'm sorry, that the strange property with surname in it. So let's change that into a more regular prefix. To do so, we define the property URL and say to define that person ID 12 has the surname Fumes. We use schema.org family name as a property. So I'm gonna type schema family name as the property. I also need to make sure I have a comma in here. So we say comma, comma, only the last line doesn't have a comma. So because I have schema in my list of prefixes, you can see that here, I can simply type schema : so I don't need to type schema.org. Okay. Now if I also wanted to make the occupation a bit nicer, I could do the same. So I'll simply add the property URL and again define schema has occupation. Okay. Right. So that's all nice. Now let's see, is there something else that we can add? Well, for example, we haven't said that these persons are actually persons. So if we had another column saying here the type, and it would read person, 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 we could say, well, 12 is of type person and 13 is of type person. So we would actually need a column to define that, but we don't have that column. To solve that problem, we can make a virtual column. So we can simply create a column, a virtual column in the recipe. So let's do that here. Because it's a virtual column, we need to say virtual true. And We then need to define the property URL, which is RDF type to specify that something is of a given type, and then value URL to specify the value URL, which is schema person. Okay, so now we created a new column. Okay, let's see what our triples now looks like. Before I do that, I'll show you the final part of the recipe. It has some metadata mainly. For example, the encoding used, the delimiter used, the publisher. You can change this any way you like. Okay, let's write the file. And now let's create again triples based on the metadata JSON file. So to do that, we use the CoW command, convert, and then cow person CSV. Okay, it's done again. Now let's see what triples we have. Okay, so we now see that our ID has changed into Smurf Squad, and that actually, try to enhance the readability a bit. Smurf Squad with ID 013 has the property relation vocab male, we didn't change that, and has value 1, so 13 male 1. We can also see that if we look for an instance of say family name, for this one, for example, this is the occupation, but person ID 13 now has schema.org, has occupation nurse. So 13 has occupation nurse. Down below we find the family names. So person ID 19, which is this one, has a family name. Let's see, family name Oak. Yeah, so okay, that all seems right. Now we also defined that each ID was of type person. Let's see whether we can find that in here. Perhaps you already spotted it. I actually have a little bit difficulty, but here it is. So, for example, Smurf Squad ID 17 is of RDF syntax type, and then it says person, so schema.org person. Yeah, so 17 type person. Okay, that's it. Happy cowing, or maybe I should say happy mooing. Bye.